First, I want to congratulate all the volunteers with the Watsika Area Food Pantry in marking their 40th anniversary. That's terrific. I can't believe it's been 40 years since I sat in a meeting of the Iroquois County Community Service Council, and Bill Harper, who was the editor of the Iroquois County Times, came to a meeting and asked if those present and their agencies would support starting a food pantry in the area. The Community Service Council included representatives from a number of social service agencies. There was even the Sheriff's Office had a representative, Children and Family Services, Disability Services, Mental Health, Public Aid, Head Start, and the Unit 9 schools. And I believe there may have been a representative from the probation office. But Bill came and asked us if we were interested. Every single agency we knew of families that could use help in meeting their food needs. So we gave him a great heads up and agreed to cooperate any way that we could. The Methodist Church graciously opened a small closet at the northwest end of the fellowship hall for us to use for the food pantry. It had a couple shelving units in it, and just by word of mouth, we initially provided some non-perishable food items to go in that room. Our agencies were told to call Mr. Harper if we knew a family that needed food assistance, and he would see that some items would be provided. At that point, we only were providing through the food pantry whatever someone had donated and non-perishable items. Either Bill or my husband Tom, who was teaching at the Glen Raymond Middle School at the time, would deliver a couple bags of groceries to those in need. And if they knew the family had children, they would make a stop at Quality Grocery and pick up milk and eggs and a loaf of bread to supplement those food orders. Sometimes Bill and Tom would ask the representative of the referring agency to deliver the food for them if they felt the family would be uncomfortable with someone in the community knowing they were getting free food. So there were a lot of hands involved in making that work initially. We didn't realize when the pantry started how many families in our community and the surrounding area were food insecure. In other words, didn't know where their next meal was coming from. As their needs became more apparent to the food pantry, we were able to get additional space to use from the church. And some organizations and even some schools began to have food drives to stock the shelves so that we could help families in need. We also accepted cash donations and got many of those from individuals and churches and organizations. Bill Harper and my husband Tom were both active with Lions Club and Kiwanis and other organizations. So they would make a little presentation about the food pantry at their club meetings. And by word of mouth, the pantry just began to grow. After a couple years, instead of Tom or Bill stopping by Quality Grocery, they were getting enough cash donations that they would set up a voucher system with the grocery store. So when a family received a couple bags of non-perishable items, they would receive a paper voucher for $15 or $25 to go to the grocery store and pick up some non-perishable items. That voucher system became problematic after a while, and the church made more space available, and we were able to write some grants for additional commercial size refrigerators and freezers so that we could stock some cold items in the pantry. Early on, the food pantry was just word of mouth for referrals. So there were no set hours, and the two volunteers were my husband Tom and Bill Harper. Um, but as the need grew and our space at the church grew, then we began to affiliate with some other organizations like the Eastern Illinois Food Bank and the Midwest Food Bank. The Eastern Illinois Food Bank out of Champaign would send a truck to Watsika once a month and bring a whole truckload of food. We knew ahead of time what day and time the truck was arriving. So food pantry volunteers would gather there at the church to unload the items shipped to us and get them stocked properly in the pantry. When Watsika was hit by big floods, I think it was around 2005, 2008, those affiliations with the Midwest and Eastern Illinois food banks were just terrific because both of the food banks in Champaign and Bloomington sent extra food into our flooded community. And our food pantry team of about 24 volunteers were a great base to open the pantry quickly and keep it open every day for an extended period of time, because a lot of the families whose homes were flooded went into very temporary housing situations, and they may not have had much access to refrigeration or even space to keep a whole week's supply of food at once. So many of them would have to come back each day in order to have their needs met. Even prior to the floods, we decided that the Harbor House would be our point of referral from families in need to the pantry. And that worked for quite a while. The main purpose of that affiliation was to try to limit families to coming to the pantry outside of emergency times like the flood, to just coming once a month, because we only had so much food available and we wanted to spread it around as best we could. But even that referral process through the Harbor House after a while just outlived its time, and it wasn't working. So we began to give those in need of food help the responsibility of calling in and having an appointment time to come into the pantry. And that worked well for everyone but the church secretary. And the poor church secretary was just flooded with calls. I mean, you knew the day before a holiday and every Monday there were just going to be dozens of phone calls. So eventually we were able to get a separate phone line for the food pantry, and that was a great help because we not only had clients calling in, but we'd have to call and schedule volunteers to help us. My husband retired in 2000 from teaching, and then it gave him a lot more time to help grow the food pantry. And then I retired in 2009, so even though he had passed on, it was the food pantry was kind of a favorite charity for both of us. So I was able to help some then too. Initially, I volunteered and helped fill food orders one day a week. And then the lady who was scheduling all of our volunteers, because by that point we were open 5 days a week for a couple hours each day. So it was a lot of scheduling to make sure we had at least 2 volunteers there each day for security reasons and to not overload anyone with the work to be done. So we would get all those people scheduled ahead of time, so we knew who was coming to help each day. And as people called in and requested an appointment, we had a card file set up so we would know the date they were coming and how many were in their household. And that card file then provided a source of data for us to use in writing grants, which I helped with, and in reporting back to the Eastern Illinois Food Bank and the Midwest Food Bank, because annually they would want to know how many people we were serving, what were the age ranges. We even had to look at race and things of that sort too. So the card file became real critical to us. I'm trying to think of anything else. Oh, when we affiliated with the Midwest Food Bank, instead of them delivering food to Watseka, we had to send a truck and a van to Bloomington once a month. And Jim Ward was able to get access to a van in Crescent City for us, or a trailer, I guess. And he would use his truck and pull the trailer, and Martha Howe, who was our go-to person at the pantry by that time, would ride along with him, because when you got to the Midwest Food Bank, someone had to go inside and they could select from a whole room of miscellaneous non-food items of things to bring back that might be of help to the folks coming to the food pantry. And then we had an assigned time when the Midwest volunteers would load the food we wanted and get it loaded in the trailer. And Jim and Martha would bring that trailer back to the Watseka First United Methodist Church. And again, our magic volunteers would be there and unload. They always loaded the frozen food last in Bloomington, and so it got off of the truck first and into the freezers when they got back to Watseka. So that was quite an operation. We had some volunteers who would only help with those deliveries, but they were younger people than some of us, so they had the muscle power to do some of the heavier lifting and so forth. And it was quite an operation to get those food supplies unloaded and stocked in an organized fashion so we could meet the needs of families in our area. We did. And other times there would be a different food item come through where we might open a package and let people taste. And that might encourage them to take something home. So while we were just handing out food, we were also trying to educate the food pantry clients about balanced meals and encourage them to try new things. So that was kind of a fun experiment that we were involved in. The schools, especially in Watseka and Cissna Park, had huge food drives for the pantry, at least the last 10 or 15 years. And most of the schools would do it twice a year. So that was a great way to educate children in the community about how fortunate they were and how many of their classmates might be unsure where their next meal came from. So it helped us be able to establish a caring attitude with the young people in the community early on, and I think that was really a good thing. Martha Howe also did an extensive amount of shopping in Watseka and Kankakee from major food suppliers like GFS or our local groceries or Walmart to buy food by cases, because some people realize that they might go out and buy actual food items and bring it into the pantry, but it might not be what we needed right then. And if they instead donated cash, then Martha was a great one to watch for sales and coupons, and she would really make that money donated go a long, long way. So she would go in her own van and pick up cases of groceries. I think some of the stores too saw the need, and when we did some purchasing, sometimes they would donate also. So that was a good thing. So maybe around 2007 or 8, our food pantry had grown extensively in the space we used at the church. And something we realized was that we might be better able to serve people if we let them select the food they took home. And that was a hard change for some of our volunteers because we were so used to just bagging stuff up and everybody got the same thing and the same amounts. And we tried to vary amounts by sizes of families. But Martha and I went to a training program at the Eastern Illinois Food Bank. And they talked about what they called a self-select process. and how providing a self-select process really addressed respect issues with the people we were serving. And while they might not be able to control some of the funds they had available to buy food, if they could control which soups or vegetables or fruits they carried home, that helped them feel a little better about the process of accepting donations. Yes, it touched their hearts. So we were able to make that change, and I think it was a good one. It took a little adjustment time for all of us. It took longer for the clients coming in to take the time to go through with a volunteer, and we had shopping lists based on the size of their families, and we would tell them, well, based on the size of your family, you get to choose so many soup and so many vegetables, so many fruits, and we would encourage them along the way to maybe try something different, and they would share their stories with us. And it might have been a story of a single father whose wife had abandoned the family and he's trying to keep these kids at home. Or it might be a young lady who was homeless. And we just, at that point, hadn't even thought of homeless people in Watsika. But there are some. So each of their stories touched our hearts, and I found that all the volunteers at the pantry really cared about the clients that we were serving and were very vested in their volunteer work and seeing it as God's work. And through all of our hands, he was able to help us reach out and show his love to ones in need in our community. So 40 years later, looking ahead the next 40 years, I'm in a different community now, and they have a food pantry. But I was amazed. It is open one day a week for 2 hours, and that's all. And they have a pretty sizable pantry, but I just couldn't believe they would only be open one day a week. I know initially the Watsika Food Pantry, I talked about how people just called in and said, I need food today, and that was as far as it went, was today. And then even when we initially had people come in, it was much more than one day a week, and it grew to 5 days a week. So I hope after this COVID thing becomes history, we can get back to normal and get back to a 5 day a week schedule, and the face-to-face time is great. And I think it's wonderful that there's a whole team of volunteers with the food pantry, because volunteers get tired and need replacements, and it's good to be grooming new replacements all along. So I think we'll need a whole team of volunteers to replace Martha Howe, but she's a pretty special woman. We used to look for her sleeping bag and tease her about maybe she slept there at the food pantry, because she was always there. So thanks for giving me this opportunity to share with your 40th anniversary, and I'll look forward to seeing people there on February the 27th for your open house.
God bless.
Okay, bye-bye.